Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every decision you've ever made, every friendship you pursued, every relationship you ruined, every career path you chose or abandoned wasn't entirely yours. Imagine that the voice inside your head, the one you've always called me, has been whispering directions written long before you were old enough to speak. You may believe you are steering the wheel of your life, but what if the wheel itself was built by someone else, and your hands merely follow grooves carved into it by forces hidden beneath the surface of your mind? The unsettling possibility is this. What if you are not the one living your life, but instead a shadow self, an unseen architect buried deep in your unconscious, has been calling the shots all along? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But how often do we stop to examine what that means? When you think about the choices you regret, was it really a conscious, deliberate act? Or did you feel something pushing you almost mechanically, as though you were following a script written by someone invisible, someone ancient, someone who knew your vulnerabilities better than you ever could? The paradox that Jung forces upon us is this. You are both the prisoner and the jailer, the actor and the playwright, the conscious being who believes in free will and the unconscious shadow that silently tugs at the strings. Think about your daily routines. You wake, you check your phone, you brush your teeth, you eat, you go to work. You talk to people in patterns that feel natural, but how much of what you say is genuinely new? How much is inherited reflex, patterned response, unconscious defense? When you laugh at a joke, is it truly because you find it funny, or because you learned long ago that laughter is a currency for belonging? When you get angry, is it because of the present moment, or because echoes of unprocessed wounds from childhood rise like ghosts, disguising themselves as fresh emotion? Your conscious mind tells you stories, creates justifications, but beneath that polished surface is something older, something that never asked your permission to exist. Imagine for a moment that there is a hidden double living inside you, and this double has been shaping the architecture of your life since the day you were born. It is the self you do not see in the mirror, the self that hides behind your ambitions, your fears, your habits. Jung called it the shadow. It is not evil by nature, though it may frighten you. It is not wholly destructive, though it can lead you into chaos. The shadow is the sum of everything you deny about yourself, everything you repress, everything you pretend does not belong to you. But here's the paradox. The more you deny it, the more power it gains. The more you repress it, the more it shapes your destiny. If you stop for just a moment and look at your life with brutal honesty, you might see patterns repeating like echoes in a canyon. Do you keep finding yourself in the same kinds of relationships, even though you promised yourself it would be different this time? Do you sabotage opportunities at the very moment success seems closest? Do you feel an inexplicable emptiness, as though the life you've built is a carefully crafted mask rather than a home for your true self? These are not accidents. They are not random quirks of chance. They are signs that the hidden self, the unconscious, has been steering you toward lessons you refuse to learn. This is the great question. Are you living your life, or is your life living you? Are you the author or the character? Jung's insight forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Until we descend into the dark caverns of our own unconscious, we are little more than marionettes pretending to be free. Freedom, then, is not about making choices, but about confronting the forces inside us that make those choices for us. And yet, what does it even mean to confront the unconscious? How can you see what, by definition, is hidden? This is where the paradox sharpens like a blade. The unconscious is invisible, but it leaves footprints everywhere. It is both nowhere and everywhere, lurking in your slip of the tongue, in the dream you forgot upon waking, in the inexplicable way a stranger's face can make you furious or enamored without reason. Your unconscious is not a stranger, it is you, and yet it feels foreign because you've spent your entire life pretending it doesn't exist. The danger is this: if you do not face your shadow, it grows monstrous. Jung believed that much of the chaos in the world is born not from evil intentions, but from individuals projecting their hidden selves outward, blaming others for what they cannot face within. Wars are fought because leaders refuse to admit their own shadows. Families fracture because parents and children cannot bear the reflection of themselves in each other's flaws. Entire societies collapse under the weight of what they repress. And if this is true, then your own private wars, your failures, your conflicts, your broken dreams may not be accidents of fate, but consequences of ignoring the unseen ruler within. So I ask you, when was the last time you stopped and asked yourself who is really in control? Do you recognize your own reflection, or is it only the version of you that others expect you to be? If the unconscious is scripting your life, then who truly are you? You may think you are awake, but perhaps you are still dreaming, dreaming that you are free, dreaming that you are conscious, dreaming that the life you live is yours alone. And yet beneath that dream stirs a question that cannot be silenced. What would happen if you dared to meet the hidden self face to face? That is where our journey begins, not in the comfort of surface-level self-help, but in the terrifying descent into the roots of the mind, where the unconscious waits, patient and powerful. The question lingers like a haunting echo. Are you ready to discover who is really living your life? The most unsettling truth about the hidden self is not simply that it exists, but that it thrives precisely because you refuse to see it. Like a shadow cast in the dim light of your awareness, it follows you everywhere, silent yet insistent, shaping your steps while remaining just beyond your direct vision. Carl Jung believed that this unconscious reservoir of repressed fears, desires, and memories forms not only the foundation of your personality, but also the cage that traps it. The problem is not that you have a shadow, it is that you believe you don't. That denial becomes the very fuel that grants it dominion over your life. Why do we repress parts of ourselves? Why do we exile entire regions of our soul into the darkness? The roots are both psychological and philosophical. From childhood, we learn through subtle cues what parts of ourselves are acceptable and what parts are not. A child who expresses anger may be scolded until they learn that rage is shameful, so they push it down. A child who cries too easily may be mocked, so they bury their sensitivity. A child whose creativity is dismissed as impractical learns to silence imagination in favor of conformity. Each of these moments seems small, but they accumulate, and slowly we carve ourselves into a socially acceptable shape, amputating whatever does not fit. The amputated pieces do not disappear. They retreat underground, where they whisper in our dreams and manipulate our habits. We call ourselves grown-ups, but in truth we are haunted children carrying entire cemeteries of abandoned selves. Jung saw this repression as psychologically necessary at first. Without it, society could not function. But he also warned that what is buried does not die. Instead, it festers, and over time it demands recognition. To ignore the unconscious is to live a half-life, moving mechanically through the motions of existence without ever encountering the depth of your own being. Friedrich Nietzsche captured this dilemma when he declared, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." The monster is not only the external enemy, it is the unacknowledged shadow within, which grows stronger the more you deny its existence. Philosophically, this brings us to a paradox. In order to become whole, you must embrace what you fear most about yourself. Schopenhauer, with his grim worldview, argued that human suffering originates in blind, unconscious drives, the will, that govern us more than reason ever can. For him, life was a struggle between acknowledging the futility of our desires and surrendering to them blindly. Jung, though less pessimistic, echoed something similar. Our unconscious drives, if left unchecked, become tyrants. They push us into repetitive cycles, binding us with invisible chains. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre added yet another dimension, the danger of bad faith, the self-deception we practice daily when we deny truths about ourselves in order to maintain a fragile sense of identity. The unconscious feeds precisely on this bad faith, thriving in the cracks between who we are and who we pretend to be. Psychologically, the shadow operates like a puppeteer hidden behind the curtain. Consider how projection works. You despise arrogance in others, but only because you deny the seeds of arrogance within yourself. You condemn dishonesty, yet you lie in subtle ways each day. The traits we most dislike in others are often reflections of the qualities we cannot bear to admit in ourselves. Thus, the world becomes a distorted mirror, and we rage at its reflection without realizing the source is our own denied nature. Jung insisted that until we confront this process, we will forever project our shadows onto others, onto enemies, partners, strangers, or entire groups of people, blaming them for the darkness we refuse to face within. But projection is only one mechanism. There is also the compulsion to repeat, a phenomenon Sigmund Freud described as the tendency to unconsciously recreate old wounds in the hope of resolving them. Why do some people consistently choose partners who treat them poorly? Why do others sabotage success just as it seems within reach? These are not random acts of self-destruction. They are the unconscious seeking recognition, forcing you to relive the trauma you deny until you finally confront it. Jung expanded on this, showing how these repetitions are not merely psychological quirks, but attempts at individuation, the unconscious striving to bring you back to wholeness by pushing your shadow into your awareness through suffering. At its root, the problem is this. We are terrified of the truth that we are not unified beings. We cling to the illusion of a singular self because it gives us a sense of stability. But beneath that illusion lies a multitude of selves, some bright, some dark, some contradictory. Nietzsche warned that one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos is the unconscious, and unless we face it, we cannot create, we cannot transform, we cannot become who we truly are. The hidden problem is not just psychological repression, it is existential cowardice, the refusal to look at the totality of who we are because we fear it will destroy the fragile identity we cling to. The danger is that in avoiding destruction, we invite it. Consider Aldous Huxley's reflection in The Doors of Perception. Our minds are vast, yet our conscious awareness functions like a reducing valve, narrowing the world so we can function. This narrowing allows us to live, but it also blinds us. The unconscious, filled with everything we exclude, grows restless in its exile. It leaks out in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in compulsions, in obsessions. When ignored for too long, it erupts in breakdowns, addictions, crises, even madness. Jung saw neurosis as a symptom not of weakness but of neglect, a signal that the hidden self has been silenced too long and now demands to be heard. This hidden problem is not abstract. It is alive in you right now. It hides in the dreams you forget each morning. It lingers in the conversations you replay endlessly in your head, wishing you had said something different. It fuels the inexplicable rage you feel towards certain people, the envy that corrodes your joy, the despair that whispers in quiet hours. It is the reason why, despite all your achievements, you still feel an emptiness you cannot explain. The unconscious is not just a psychological theory. It is the invisible hand on your shoulder, steering you toward lessons you cannot escape. And so the question becomes, if the shadow is always with us, if repression and projection and repetition are unavoidable, then what hope do we have? How can we face what is designed to remain hidden? To explore this, we must look not only at the psychological mechanics, but also at the consequences, how this hidden self reshapes our lives, our relationships, even our societies, in ways we rarely recognize until it is too late. The most dangerous forces in your life are often the ones you cannot see. The unconscious does not shout, it whispers, and yet those whispers guide entire lifetimes. To live without confronting your shadow is to walk through the world half blind, mistaking echoes for truth, puppets for people, reflexes for freedom. And though you may believe the cost of ignoring your hidden self is only personal dissatisfaction, the consequences extend far beyond your own life, shaping families, societies, even the course of history. Consider how many conflicts between lovers or friends are not truly about the surface issue, a misplaced word, a forgotten responsibility, a careless mistake, but about unresolved wounds hidden beneath. One partner explodes in jealousy, convinced the other has betrayed them, when in reality they are projecting old betrayals they never healed from. Another withdraws in silence, not because they do not care, but because as children they learned that silence was safer than vulnerability. What appears as incompatibility is often two unconscious shadows wrestling, while the conscious selves stand bewildered, wondering why love feels like war. The unseen consequence of unacknowledged shadows in relationships is the slow erosion of trust, intimacy, and authenticity. Instead of seeing one another, we see mirrors, distorted by projection, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we cannot accept. Extend this to families. parents unconsciously pass down their own shadows to their children. A father who represses tenderness mocks his son for crying, teaching him that vulnerability is weakness. A mother who denies her own ambition pushes her daughter to achieve what she herself could not, burdening the child with unspoken expectations. Generational wounds, unexamined and unhealed, are handed down like heirlooms, shaping identities before children even know who they are. Entire family legacies are carved not by conscious intention, but by unconscious inheritance, where unspoken rules, "we don't talk about this, we always do that," become invisible prisons for those who follow. But the unconscious does not stop at the intimate, it scales upward into society itself. Jung believed that entire cultures have shadows, collective dimensions of the unconscious that manifest in myths, religions, political movements, and wars. When individuals deny their shadows, they project them outward, often onto entire groups. Racism, nationalism, ideological fanaticism, these are not merely political issues. They are collective projections of shadows unacknowledged within. When people cannot face the chaos inside, they externalize it, declaring war on the other. History is littered with the consequences. Crusades justified by divine purity, genocides rationalized as defense, dictatorships born from the fear of freedom. These are not aberrations, they are the shadow's revenge for centuries of repression. The most unsettling consequence of the unconscious is repetition on a mass scale. Just as individuals repeat old wounds in their personal lives, societies repeat cycles of violence, oppression, and collapse. Look at history. Empires rise in glory, intoxicated by their light, and yet in that very intoxication they repress their weaknesses, their flaws, their shadows. Eventually, what they deny festers until it erupts, Rome collapsing under its own corruption, revolutions devouring their founders, utopias descending into dystopias. The cycle continues because the collective unconscious has not been faced. Nations, like individuals, cling to illusions of superiority, purity, or destiny, and in doing so, they ensure their downfall. And what of the individual who ignores their shadow? The consequences are quieter, but no less devastating. Imagine someone who spends their entire life chasing success, believing it will fill the emptiness inside. They build wealth, status, reputation, yet feel restless, unsatisfied. Why? Because the ambition was never fully theirs. It was born from a repressed wound, a need to prove worth to a parent who never gave approval. They achieve everything society tells them to want, only to find that they have lived someone else's life. Another person may sabotage every opportunity, convincing themselves they are unlucky, when in truth, their unconscious has aligned them with failure to avoid the terrifying responsibility of success. Others numb themselves with distractions, endless scrolling, alcohol, workaholism, because silence would for sure force them to hear the whispers of the shadow. The cost is not just unhappiness, it is the loss of authenticity, of living a life that is truly one's own. Neurologically, these patterns are etched deep into the brain. The amygdala, seat of fear, responds to triggers long before the rational prefrontal cortex has time to act. Trauma imprints neural pathways that prime us for repetition, making unconscious reactions faster than conscious thought. Cognitive biases, confirmation bias, negativity bias, self-serving bias, are not quirks of intellect but shadows of the unconscious, shaping perception long before awareness catches up. The consequence is a life lived in reaction rather than creation, a life steered by ancient wiring disguised as present choice. Culturally, we see this in the obsession with productivity, beauty, and success. These ideals are presented as conscious goals, but beneath them lies a collective shadow, the fear of inadequacy. Advertising thrives on it, promising that a new product will make us whole. Social media amplifies it, rewarding curated illusions over raw authenticity. The consequence is a society of masks, where everyone performs happiness while privately sinking into anxiety and despair. The unconscious manifests not only in individuals, but in the very structures we build, perpetuating dissatisfaction on a mass scale. And here is the cruelest irony. The very attempt to deny the shadow strengthens it. The more you suppress anger, the more it erupts uncontrollably. The more you deny vulnerability, the more fragile you become. The more you insist you are free, the more enslaved you are to unseen drives. Jung warned that repression does not dissolve energy, it only displaces it. What you push down does not vanish, it leaks, it mutates, it reappears in distorted forms. The consequence is that your greatest enemy may not be the world outside, but the silence inside, where neglected parts of you plot their inevitable return. Look around your own life. How many of your struggles are accidents, and how many are repetitions? How many of your conflicts are truly about the other person, and how many are projections of yourself? How much of what you suffer comes not from the world, but from the unseen hand of your own shadow, guiding you toward lessons you resist? These questions are not meant to accuse, but to reveal. For if you do not ask them, life will ask them for you, in the form of failure, heartbreak, illness, or crisis. The unseen consequences of ignoring your unconscious are everywhere. Broken families, unfulfilled lives, societies tearing themselves apart. They are the price we pay for refusing to face the totality of who we are. Yet there is also a strange hope hidden in this grim truth. For if the shadow can destroy, it can also heal. If it can bind, it can also liberate. If the unconscious rules us when denied, perhaps it can empower us when acknowledged. The path forward is not repression, but rebellion. A rebellion not against the shadow itself, but against the illusion that you are whole without it. The rebellion. How to break free. What if the most radical rebellion you could ever wage was not against society, not against authority, not even against fate itself, but against the unseen master within you? To rebel against your unconscious shadow is not to destroy it, but to confront it, to take back the life that was stolen from you by forces you never dared to face. The paradox is that this rebellion is not about fighting, at least not in the way you think. It is about turning toward what you have spent your entire life running from. It is about daring to look into the mirror and seeing not only your light, but also your darkness, and then refusing to flinch. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness, what he called individuation, begins with the act of making the unconscious conscious. But how do you rebel against something that hides in shadows? The first step is ruthless honesty. Stop pretending that you are only what you show the world. Stop rehearsing the mask so perfectly that you begin to believe it yourself. Instead, begin asking questions that unsettle. Why do I react this way? What am I avoiding? What am I projecting onto others that truly belongs to me? Every question aimed inward loosens the shadow's grip. Every acknowledgement of a denied truth steals back power from the unconscious. The rebellion requires courage, because what you will uncover is not always flattering. You may find anger where you claim to be patient, envy where you claim to be selfless, fear where you claim to be strong. But here is the secret. Those discoveries do not weaken you, they free you. Nietzsche declared, "Become who you are." But how can you become who you are if you refuse to see half of yourself? To rebel is to expand your identity, to include even the parts you despise, to claim them as yours, rather than pretending they belong to others. Think of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who endured the horrors of the concentration camps. Stripped of freedom, dignity, and certainty, he discovered that while he could not control his external fate, he could still choose his inner response. "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing," he wrote, "the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Frankl's insight was not about denying suffering, but confronting it, integrating it, and transforming it into meaning. His rebellion was not against his captors, but against despair itself, against the unconscious pull toward hopelessness. You too face circumstances shaped by forces beyond your control, but the deepest rebellion is the choice to face the shadow not as enemy, but as teacher. Historically, some of the most transformative figures embodied this rebellion. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was born a slave, yet he taught that true freedom lies not in external conditions, but in mastery over one's own mind. His rebellion was the refusal to let the unconscious fear of suffering dictate his life. Similarly, Jung's concept of integrating the shadow echoes across spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, enlightenment is not achieved by repressing desire or fear, but by observing them with awareness, dissolving their hold through radical presence. In Christianity, the story of Christ's descent into hell before resurrection symbolizes the same archetype. One must face the depths before ascending to light. The rebellion, then, is not about denial, but descent, not escape, but confrontation. On a practical level, how do you rebel against the unconscious? Begin with awareness. Keep a journal of your dreams, for in them the shadow speaks in symbols. Pay attention to your strongest emotions, especially the ones that seem disproportionate to the situation, for they often signal old wounds disguised as present conflicts. Notice your projections. When you feel intense dislike or admiration for someone, ask yourself what part of you they reflect. These practices are not glamorous, but they are revolutionary, because they chip away at the illusion that you are fully conscious. But awareness alone is not enough. Rebellion requires integration. To integrate is to give the shadow a seat at the table of your psyche rather than banishing it to the basement. This does not mean acting out every dark impulse, but acknowledging that those impulses exist and finding constructive ways to honor their energy. If you repress anger, it becomes destructive. If you acknowledge it, it can fuel passion and courage. If you deny ambition, it festers into envy. If you integrate it, it drives growth and achievement. The shadow's energy is not evil, it is raw. Integration transforms poison into medicine, chaos into creativity. Of course, the path is not without danger. To confront the unconscious is to risk being consumed by it. Jung warned that one must have a strong ego to withstand the descent. Otherwise, the chaos of the unconscious can overwhelm. This is why the rebellion must be balanced, neither repression nor indulgence, but dialogue. To sit with your shadow is to enter a lifelong conversation with yourself, to accept that wholeness is not about purity, but about complexity. The rebellion also requires compassion for yourself and for others. Once you recognize your own shadow, you begin to see that everyone else is also struggling with theirs. The person who angers you is projecting their pain. The person who frightens you is controlled by wounds they cannot face. Compassion does not excuse harmful behavior, but it allows you to see beyond it, to recognize that we are all caught in the same hidden currents. This recognition itself is revolutionary, for it dismantles the illusion of separation and opens the possibility of true connection. Imagine what your life would look like if you dared this rebellion. No more endless repetitions of the same wounds, no more sabotaging your own happiness, no more performing a mask for others while dying inside. Imagine a life where your choices truly belong to you, not to a script written by childhood wounds or societal expectations. This is not an easy life. It is harder than living asleep, but it is authentic, and authenticity is freedom. The rebellion is not a single act, but a lifelong process. Every time you notice a projection, every time you acknowledge a hidden desire, every time you choose to confront rather than repress, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Slowly, you gather the fragments of your being until you become whole, not perfect, not pure, but real. And perhaps that is the greatest rebellion of all, to stop pretending, to live without illusion, to accept yourself in full. Yet even here, in the midst of rebellion, a deeper question lingers. If the unconscious is not only personal but collective, if shadows shape entire societies, then how far can individual rebellion go? Can one person's integration ripple outward into culture itself? And what happens when enough individuals rebel, when enough shadows are faced? The answer leads us to the final frontier, where rebellion transforms into revelation, and the ultimate truth waits to be uncovered, the final mirror of fate. As the great river of thought wound toward its quiet bend, the question of whether the universe itself bore witness to our suffering, or whether it remained an indifferent stage, began to dominate the wanderer's reflections. He remembered sitting beneath the broken colonnades of a ruined temple where moss had swallowed the marble steps and ivy coiled like veins across fallen statues. There, he felt both the beauty of creation and the silence of abandonment. What struck him was not the absence of gods, but the overwhelming presence of chance, the strange machinery of time where victories dissolved into dust, kingdoms eroded into fragments, and even names once whispered with reverence now faded beyond memory. He wondered if all existence was nothing more than a reflection of itself, an endless hall of mirrors where human stories stretched like echoes until they vanished into silence. If so, what did it mean for him, for his choices, for the battles fought inside his mind? He thought of the stranger's words, still lingering like the aftertaste of iron. You are both the cage and the key. Perhaps life itself was that mirror, each action bouncing endlessly across its surface until distorted into a new form. If love was given, it might return as betrayal. If cruelty was sown, it might emerge as strength in another. And if silence was chosen, it might thunder into eternity in ways unseen. The more he tried to define the self, the more he realized it shifted under scrutiny, like trying to grasp water only to feel it slipping through his fingers. He was left with a haunting recognition that perhaps the deepest truths were not to be held but to be endured, lived like a wound that never fully healed yet never fully destroyed. Walking onward, he came upon a pool of still water beneath the canopy of dark trees, and kneeling, he saw his reflection ripple. But as the moonlight touched its surface, it was not only his own face he saw, it was a shifting gallery of every life he might have lived, every choice unchosen, every self abandoned. For a breathless instant, he felt the crushing weight of infinite versions of himself, all equally real, all equally lost, and the silence that followed was not empty but complete, as though the universe had, for a moment, revealed itself not as a god, nor as a void, but as an endless mirror in which every gaze was both question and answer. It was then he realized that the stranger had never truly left, for the stranger had always been himself, shadowed in another shape, haunting him until he dared to recognize the truth. And so, with trembling hands and a heart heavy with paradox, he turned from the water and walked into the darkness, carrying not answers, but the unbearable beauty of unending questions.